Chapter 23. Day 3. 0700. "What's up, bitch?" a deep and angry-sounding voice asked. Cameron was staring down at his shoes in silence. A knit cap was on his head, and he wore his winter coat over his prison khakis. As he looked up and sighed, he could see his cloud of breath fill the air in front of him. "Yeah, you," the man, a long-haired and bearded neo-Nazi named Wesley, boomed. "Baby killer." "Fuck you, Wesley," Cameron whispered as he turned his back toward the man. That was enough to get an open palm slammed against the back of his head. "Watch your language, bitch," Wesley snapped. "So you remember what I said to you when you first got here? That I'd gut you like a fucking pig and listen to you squeal?" "Please." Cameron held his arms out as he turned and faced the big man. "Please, just do it. I have nothing to live for anyway." Wesley scoffed and licked his lips. He shook his head and leaned in close to Cameron. "Oh, no, not before I have a little fun with you," he whispered. "Try it." Cameron raised his head and snickered at Wesley. "I'd hate to kick your ass and then tell your mommy on you the next time she comes to visit me." Wesley raised his upper lip and threw his fist forward, slamming his knuckles into Cameron's throat. Cameron gasped and keeled over. Wesley followed up with an elbow to the back of Cameron's head. "You want to say that again, you fucking baby killer?" Wesley shouted as he stomped on Cameron's back. "Say it again! Come on, big guy, talk!" Cameron gasped as the toe of Wesley's boot slammed against his ribs. "Talk, you little piece of shit!" A siren suddenly sounded, and everyone on the yard fell to the ground and placed their hands on the back of their heads. Wesley, however, didn't stop. "Yeah, you pussy!" Wesley laughed maniacally. "This is what you get for killing your kids!" "Stop!" a guard shouted as he approached. "Get on the ground, Wesley!" "Fuck you!" Wesley shouted as he stomped on the back of Cameron's head. He raised his foot to stomp again. "I'm gonna pop your head like a grape!" The guard lunged forward and tackled Wesley to the ground. Cameron's head was spinning. He was barely holding on to consciousness. He heard Wesley wail with anger as the guard pepper-sprayed him, and soon enough more guards jumped on top of him. He wished Wesley had been better at head-stomping. He wished the man had just killed him. Cameron opened his eyes and was immediately blinded by the sunlight. He groaned and covered them with his hands, turning away as best as he could. As he moved, though, his hand fell upon something metal. He touched it for a moment, not bothering to look up, and tried to figure out what it was. It felt like a sphere, though slightly elongated. "Excuse me," a Dutch-accented man gently exclaimed. "You are fondling my penis." Cameron sat up quickly. He knew that voice. He looked over and saw a blond, mostly naked man lying next to him. He was wearing only a golden codpiece and had his lips pursed together awkwardly. "Howdy, partner," the Dutchman exclaimed. "Fancy seeing you here." "Oh, shit," Cameron belted. "Not you again." He turned around and saw that he was surrounded by iron bars. A wave of panic came over him as he realized he was in a cage. Quickly, he pressed himself up against the bars and began shouting for help. "Oh, that doesn't work," the Dutchman said with a wave of his finger. "I tried it for quite a long time." "What the hell are you doing here?" Cameron shouted. "Well," the Dutchman seemed to lose himself in reminiscence. "After our night of spoony comfort, I ran off into the woods, afraid that you would shoot me in the behind. It was only a few hours before the Slayer men found me. They told me to join them or die. Of course I said I would join. What kind of fool would choose to die?" "So why are you in a cage?" Cameron asked. "And why are you only wearing that shiny dick guard thing?" "Oh, this old thing," the Dutchman quipped as he looked down at his Netherlands. "They gave this to me after I joined them. They said it would be fun. I don't completely disagree. It is funny, but it chafes something terrible. As far as this cage nonsense goes, the Slayers seem to keep everyone in a cage when they first recruit them. A test of mental fortitude, perhaps. My name is Andreas, by the way. What is your name?" "Cameron," he replied, unable to keep his eyes from wandering to the blindingly shiny codpiece. It wasn't that he wanted to look at it was more a disbelieving curiosity. "Lovely to meet you, Cameron," Andreas said as he extended his hand. Cameron reluctantly shook the man's hand, forgetting to blink as he did so. The mere presence of this ridiculous man left Cameron struggling to find his words. Andreas released Cameron's hand and stood up in their cage. He stretched his body out, arching his back, and let out a loud and obnoxious groan. When he was done, he placed his hands on his hips and turned in all directions, observing their surroundings and simultaneously smacking his lips together. "Jesus Christ," Cameron sighed as he shielded his eyes. Andreas's naked butt cheeks were directly in his face as he bent over to stretch his lower back muscles. "So, what brings you to the Slayer's Cap, partner?" Andreas asked as he turned his head and looked over, still holding the tips of his toes with his hands. "Have you joined our happy little community of killers?" "No," Cameron replied, having shielded his eyes. "Can you please stop doing that? I'm not a marine biologist. I don't want to see your starfish all day." "Oh!" Andreas exclaimed as he stood up. His face flushed with embarrassment, and he knelt down to face Cameron. "My apologies, cowboy. I've grown accustomed to being alone in here." "Well, you're not anymore," Cameron sighed as he stood. "Do you have any idea what they have planned for me?" "I don't know," Andreas replied. "They don't tell me things. They mostly just throw food at me and make funny jokes. They seem to like me very much." "I don't think that means they like you," Cameron said with a raised eyebrow. "I think that means they like fucking with you." "Oh, that is rude." Andreas's face wrinkled up and his nostrils flared. "Why wouldn't they like me?" Cameron glanced down at the codpiece again and sighed. Without another word, he turned and looked out past the bars. They were in a wide-open field. Small buildings had been constructed and a large bonfire burned about 100 yards away from them. Cameron watched a handful of people walk around and talk or joke to themselves. A few of them noticed that he was awake and pointed at him or looked his way. Cameron watched as 2 of them turned and ran to one of the nicer-looking stone buildings. "What's this place?" Cameron asked as he nodded to the building. "What place?" Andreas asked as he quickly jumped behind Cameron. He could feel the heat of the Dutchman's bare chest pressing up against his back, and the stubble from his cheek against his ear as Andreas leaned in for a better look. Cameron panicked and spun around, shoving the man backward and into the bars. "Okay, for one." Cameron extended a finger toward Andreas. "Sorry I pushed you so hard. It was an accident. 2, you need to respect my personal space." Andreas stood erect and saluted like an American soldier. "Yes, sir," he exclaimed with a serious look on his face. Cameron didn't know what to think of the strange response. Andreas didn't seem like he was playing. There was clearly a cog in his mind that needed a little oil. "Okay," Cameron said as he took a step back from the man. "So, what is that stone building?" "That is where Stephen lives," Andreas replied. "Stephen is the leader of the Slayers." "Yes, I know who he is," Cameron snapped. "Oh, good," Andreas chirped. "Oh, look, he's coming now." Cameron watched as Stephen emerged from the front door of his home and smiled. He looked up at the sky and held his hands out as he talked to his people. Cameron couldn't hear what he was saying, but he watched as he patted one of his men on the back and then turned toward Cameron. "Oh, he's coming to us," Andreas declared. "Excellent. Maybe he'll let me out." Cameron ignored Andreas and watched with a stern expression as Stephen drew nearer. He wrapped his fingers around the bars in front of him, not breaking eye contact. When Stephen stopped in front of Cameron's cage, he flashed a smile and reached out, grabbing one of the bars like Cameron. "Good morning, mate," Stephen said nonchalantly. "Did you sleep well?" "How did I get in here?" Cameron demanded. "We gave you a little something special to help you sleep," Stephen replied flatly. "Then we just put you in. Easy shit." "What do you plan to do with me?" Cameron asked. "Well, right now I plan to let you out," Stephen said as he pulled a key out of his inventory. "Step back." 2 of Stephen's men ran up alongside him and raised their rifles as he unlocked the cage. He pushed the door open and extended his hand, motioning for Cameron to join him outside. "Oh, me too?" Andreas asked with a step forward. "No, idiot." Stephen rolled his eyes and the guards aimed their rifles at him. "Maybe later." "Oh, okay." Andreas nodded as he stepped backward and pressed himself against the bars behind him. "No problem, boss." Stephen rolled his eyes and turned back to Cameron. "Go on now, Cameron," he said. "We've a lot to do today." Cameron reluctantly stepped out of the cage and up to the leader of the Slayers. Stephen smiled wickedly and threw his arm around Cameron's shoulders. You see this man? Stephen shouted to the men that accompanied him. This fucking gem of a man is gonna outlive all of you sorry bastards. I love this guy. Get off me, Cameron grumbled. Stephen laughed and released Cameron, slapping him on the back hard. You and me, Cameron, Stephen declared with a certain sincerity in his voice. We're gonna be rich, mate. We're gonna be famous. We'll spend the rest of our days on our yachts, fucking beautiful women and drinking until we fall overboard. You and me. Cameron frowned at the idea. He wanted nothing to do with Stephen's dreams of grandeur. He just wanted to live his life with his only remaining child in peace. He said nothing in response to Stephen's words, garnering a charismatic wink from the man. Come on, let me show you something, Stephen belted as he guided Cameron away from the cage. I've been waiting all night for you to see this. He gave Cameron a gentle push forward with his fingertips. Cameron begrudgingly walked forward, following Stephen's soldiers. After a few short minutes, they arrived at the stone 2-story building that Andreas had said was Stephen's house. Come around back with me, Stephen beckoned. There's something real interesting back here that I made just for you. Cameron felt uneasy as he followed Stephen around the side of the house. Stephen giggled to himself softly, clearly eager to reveal whatever it was that he had created to Cameron. As they finally rounded the side of the building and walked behind it, Cameron couldn't help but gasp. 2 crosses were sticking out of the ground. At the foot of them were logs and sticks formed in a pyramid shape like a bonfire. Hanging from the crosses were the groaning and clearly distressed bodies of Pag and Bernard. The one with one leg was difficult to hang, Stephen chuckled and said to Cameron with a matter-of-fact tone. The kid was squirmy as fuck, kept throwing fireballs and biting my men, but we got him. Let them down, Cameron snarled as he turned to Stephen. He reached his hand out and grabbed the man by the collar. Let them down now! Watch yourself, Stephen replied. He slammed his forehead against Cameron's nose, and Cameron gasped and fell backward. We're mates, yes? Stephen said as he loomed over Cameron's kneeling body. But I won't have you undermining my position, especially in front of my men. Do you hear me? Cameron glared up at Stephen. Blood trailed from his nostrils and gathered at his chin. Fuck you! He shouted. Stephen laughed and pulled his hammer from his back. I don't ask much from my people, Stephen said as he casually walked over to Bernard. He looked up at the man with an expression of false admiration. Only that they fall in line and do what I say. I don't ask this for my own gratification, no. I do this because I'm the one who keeps them alive. They recognize this, and that is why they follow me. Stephen raised the head of his hammer and poked Bernard in his only remaining knee. Back in ancient times, if they wanted to speed up the death of a crucified man, they'd break his legs, Stephen said as he gritted his teeth and pushed the hammer against Bernard's knee. This would cause the rest of their body to fall, and they wouldn't be able to breathe. It would take a few minutes, but they'd eventually die. Stephen snorted as he looked up at Bernard. Time to make a choice, Cameron. Stephen quickly turned and slammed his hammer against Bernard's knee. Cameron heard the bones shatter, and Bernard let out a loud wail as his upper body fell. He began to fight for air, and Cameron quickly stood. No! He shouted. Cut him down! He's a good man! Then join me, Stephen growled as he quickly stepped up to Cameron. Their noses were only inches apart, and Stephen smiled an evil smile as he stared daggers into Cameron's skull. Be my new officer, fight for me, and survive with me. If you do, they will be cut down from the crosses. They will be healed and given as much an opportunity as everyone else here has to survive. Choose now, Cameron. The old man has only a minute or 2. Cameron stared up at Bernard with fear in his eyes. The last thing he wanted to do was work with Stephen. He hated the man. He only wanted to see him dead. But if he refused, Bernard and Pag would surely die. He couldn't allow that. Slowly, he nodded his head and Stephen belted a laugh. Say it, Stephen shouted. Say you will join me. I will join you, Cameron yelled. Now cut them down. Stephen laughed a satisfied laugh and turned to his men. Do it, he ordered. Cut them free, and say hello to your new captain.